Sometimes reality produces a story so perfect, so narratively complete, that fiction can only hope to pay tribute. A story with a flawless arc, an underdog hero, and a final moment that feels almost too good to be true. If you have been anywhere near the worlds of anime or mobile gaming recently, you might recognize this character. She is a quiet, gray-haired girl from the countryside, a monster on the racetrack with a stoic personality and an almost comically huge appetite. She is stronger than anyone. She is loved than anyone else. She is Oguri Cap, a central figure from the world of Umamusume Pretty Derby, the game that has in recent times completely dominated the cultural landscape and become a genuine phenomenon. But her story didn't begin in a writer's room. It began decades ago on a racetrack, because she is the reincarnation of one of Japan's greatest supporting legends, a real horse named Oguri Cap, an ash gray colt from humble beginnings who became a national icon, the people's champion, and the catalyst for a massive cultural boom in the late 1980s. And with the anniversary of his passing having just occurred on July 3rd, it feels like the right time to tell his story. To anyone else, this is a horse, but to Umamusume fans, this is the GOAT. So this is the tribute for the absolute GOAT, looking at how the life of this animal provided the perfect blueprint for a modern hero, and how a horse who retired over 30 years ago became one of the most compelling protagonists in anime today. And gaming too. So to really understand why this adaptation works so well, you first have to understand the source material. And in this case, the source material wasn't a manga or a light novel, it was the life of an actual horse. Because when you break it down, the story of the real Oguri Cap, I'm gonna say it normally now, Oguri Cap, reads less like a history record and more like a pre-written, almost perfectly structured hero's journey. It has all of the core elements you would look for in fiction. It starts with the humble origins, the classic Cinderella angle. Oguri Cap didn't come from the top tier of Japanese racing, the JRA, which is basically the major leagues. He started off in the regional circuits, the NAR. So right from the beginning, he is branded as an outsider, a country horse, being taken to the Old Town Road. I don't even know what I'm saying. Haha. No, you don't think that's funny? And on top of that, his pedigree, his bloodline, wasn't considered elite. In a world like thoroughbred racing, where the lineage is everything, he wasn't expected to be a world beater. This set up a very real, very tangible conflict that the public could easily grasp. The scrappy kid from the countryside going up against the established blue blood elites of the central circuit. Kinda like a shonen story. But this is where the twist happens. Because while he was an underdog in status, he was an absolute monster on the track.
Yo, 怪物。
When he finally moved to the JRA, he went on an undefeated 6-race winning streak. All the initial skepticism from the commentators, the quiet doubts about whether this regional horse could actually compete, that all vanished pretty quickly. It became clear he wasn't just a good horse, he was a dominant force. Kaibutsu. Over his career, his total earnings would amount to over 912 million yen. He had this immense, undeniable power that completely contradicted his humble background. But what is a hero without a rival? History gave him the perfect one in a horse named Tamamo Cross. The media and the public loved this matchup because it's like a storyteller's gift. They were both this striking gray horses who had clawed their way up to the top. The gray versus gray narrative practically wrote itself, and their duels on the track played out like a classic dramatic arc. In the autumn of 1988, Tamamo Cross defeated him in a major race, the Tenno Show. It was a setback for Oguri, but then just a couple of months later, in the season-ending championships, the Arima Kinen, Oguri Cap turns the tables and gets his revenge. It's that perfect back-and-forth struggle that defines any great rivalry. But his challenges didn't stop there. After Tamamo Cross retired, Oguri became one of the cornerstones of a new rivalry, a trio of older dominant horses known as the Heisei Big Three. Alongside Super Creek and Inari 1, he battled for supremacy throughout the 1989 season in a series of epic clashes that kept the entire nation watching. But the final act of his career is what cemented him as a legend. It is the kind of ending that, if you wrote it for a movie, people might say it was a little too unbelievable. By the end of 1990, Oguri Cap was in the worst slump of his career. He was coming off 2 humiliating losses, a 6th place finish, and then a shocking 11th. The experts had completely written him off. He was old, he was way past his prime, and he was heading for a quiet retirement. But the public's faith never really wavered. For his final race, that year's Arima Kinen, a record-breaking crowd of over 177,000 people packed into the stands. They weren't just there to bet, they were there to see their hero one last time. And somehow, he delivered a miracle. He surged in the final stretch and won the race. The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous, and it is now one of the most famous moments in Japanese sporting history. As he crossed the finish line, this spontaneous deafening chant of his name, the Oguri Cap, erupted from the stands. It was this wave of pure unscripted emotion from nearly 200,000 people. It is the perfect storybook ending. The fallen hero, counted out by everyone, returns for one last impossible triumph. It is a moment of catharsis that fiction constantly strives for, but reality very rarely provides. So when you have a real story with all of these elements already in place, the question for a creator isn't, what do we invent? But rather, how do we translate it? Well, the first and I think the smartest thing the creator did was in translating Oguri Cap's spirit into a personality. The real horse was known for his immense fighting spirit. He was nicknamed the Gray Monster, a kaibutsu. The easy route would have been to make the character loud, aggressive, a typical shonen protagonist, but they didn't do that. Instead, the Oguri Cap of Umamusume is quiet. She is stoic. In anime terms, she is what you would call a kudere. That is the type of character who is cool and distant on the outside, but has a lot going on underneath. It is a deliberate choice, and I think it's a clever one. By making her so reserved in her daily life, the moments when that monster power is unleashed on the track become far more impactful. It creates a stark contrast that makes her presence feel immense. And then there's that most famous trait, the one that is a direct one-to-one adaptation. The appetite! The real horse was a notoriously huge eater. The anime takes this fact and turns it into her defining quirk. This is where you see the fan community really latch on, giving her nicknames like Oguri the Grey Munchster and spawning memes about her ordering over 900 family meals from KFC during a promotion. It is more than a gag, I think. It makes the monster endearing in a way, and this idea is woven right into the game's mechanics with brilliant complexity. On the surface, you have the gourmand skill, which literally restores her stamina mid-race. You know, pretty simple enough. But looking in deeper, her in-game design is a masterclass in reflecting the real horse's versatility. She possesses an A aptitude for both turf and dirt tracks. She can excel both mile and medium distances. This means players can build her as a pacer who stays mid-pack or a late surger who closes from behind. This mechanical flexibility isn't just for gameplay variety, it is a direct reflection of the real Oguri Cap's remarkable ability to win major races under wildly different conditions. It lets the player feel his legendary adaptability. And now finally, you see this art of translation in the small details of her design, the things you might not notice at first glance. These are the quiet homages that show a deep respect for the source material. The crown she wears, with its yellow and diamond pattern, it is a direct reference of the racing skills. The jockey's uniform, one of her primary owners. The little star emblem on her school uniform collar, that is the Kasamatsu star, a symbol of her humble home racecourse where her journey began. Like they ground this fantasy character in historical fact. They are a constant quiet acknowledgement of the real legacy she represents. And this same level of detail, this respect for the source material, is applied to how they handle the actual iconic events of Oguri Cap's career. The creators use the historical record as a scaffolding to build their drama. They take the key moments and amplify the emotion that was already there. A perfect example of this is how they handled the Japanese Derby. In real life, Oguri Cap was barred from entering the Derby, which is the most prestigious race for a 3-year-old horse in Japan. The reason was simple, a bureaucratic one. He had started his career in the regional leagues, and the registration rules at the time just didn't allow him to participate. Now, a lesser adaptation might have just skipped this, right? Or mentioned it in passing. But in Cinderella Grey, this isn't a footnote. It is a tragic, defining moment for the character. It is framed as a gut punch. The story shows her dreaming of winning, only to have that dream ripped away by a rule she can do nothing about. It powerfully reinforces her status as an outsider being blocked by the system, turning a simple rule book issue into a deep personal struggle that fuels her motivation for the rest of the story. You also see this in how how they frame her rivalry with Tamamo Cross. We know from the record that their first major clash ended in a loss for Oguri Cap, but in the anime this is not just a loss, it is the climax for the entire first season. The story deliberately builds Tamamo Cross up as the seemingly unbeatable peak, so when Oguri loses, it is not portrayed as a failure. It is the spark for her growth. It is the moment she understands the level she needs to reach, giving her a real tangible goal instead of just a vague desire to win. They took a historical defeat and turned it into the true beginning of her journey as a top-tier competitor. But maybe the most masterful choice they made in dramatizing the record is with a character who never even existed, her trainer, Kitahara Joe. In reality, Oguri Cap's success was the product of many people. His first trainer at Kasamatsu, his JRA trainer, Tsutomuse Toguchi, and most importantly, his groom, 𝗖ście Toshiro, who was so dedicated that stories say he damaged his own eyesight giving the horse daily therapeutic treatments. Instead of trying to juggle all of these different figures, the creators made a single composite character. Kitahara Joe embodies the faith of all of them. He has the skill of the trainers, and most importantly, he carries the deep emotional bond of the groom. It is a very smart storytelling choice. It streamlines the narrative, giving the audience one powerful, central relationship to invest in, which carries all of the emotional weight of her entire real-life support system. It is a series of deliberate choices that all serve one purpose: to honor the spirit of the original story. And the effect this has had is remarkable, because what you end up with isn't just a successful adaptation. It is a symbiotic relationship between the past and the present. One couldn't really exist as it does without the other. The incredible dramatic reality of the horse gave the fiction its soul. It provided a story so emotionally resonant that it felt so true, because it was. But now, the fiction is repaying that debt. The popularity of Umamusume and the Cinderella Grey in particular has driven a massive new wave of interest in the historical record. In essence, it's created a second Oguri Cap boom, over 3 decades after the first one ended. This isn't an exaggeration, okay? The original boom was so intense that when the real Oguri Cap retired to stud at the Yushin Stallion Station, the farm had to install bleachers just to handle the throngs of fans who traveled all the way to Hokkaido simply to sit and watch their hero graze in his paddock. And today, you see that same passion reborn. His old home track, Kasamatsu Racecourse, now hosts collaboration events, and thousands of fans of the anime show up, traveling to this little town to walk the grounds where their hero's journey began. They're connecting with the history because the fiction invited them in, which brings us to what this all really means, okay? A franchise like this, through a character like Oguri Cap, functions as a form of cultural preservation. It is entertainment, but it is also a living monument. It ensures that these legendary stories don't just endure in dusty record books or in the memories of those who were there. They are being felt, experienced, and loved by an entirely new generation, both in Japan and globally. The legend isn't just being remembered, it is alive, and it is still running. So that leaves me with one final thought I would like to leave with you. When adapting a true story, what do you think is more important? Strict factual accuracy or capturing the emotional spirit of the events? Let me know your thoughts down below, but that is all from me, 𝗖ście, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers!